Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to Mumbai Angels Network's Reboot 2 Industry Edition, a series of events focused on the challenges and opportunities for specific sectors in the new normal. Before we begin, a quick request to all of you to please keep your devices on mute to ensure you can hear the speakers clearly and participate better. The session is divided into 40 minutes of panel discussion and 20 minutes of Q&A. Do send in your questions to us during chat, and our team will curate it and we'll try our best to get them answered by our esteemed panelists. The sector in focus for today is EdTech, which has always been a pioneering space for purpose-driven innovation built to make a positive and lasting impact on society. At a time when industry and indeed the world as we know it faces some of the biggest fundamental shifts in its history, EdTech companies have subsequently been met with unprecedented demand to help individuals as well as organizations navigate this uncertain period. I would like to acknowledge our sponsors and partners for today's session, our event partner, Ideal Insurance Brokers, and our taxation partner, TaxManta Global. Our panelists for today's session are Mr. Maheshwar Perry, Chairman, Careers 360. A passionate entrepreneur, Mahesh is a qualified CA, CMA, and ACS. He started his career as an investment banker with SBI Capital Markets. He was associated with the Outlook Group for 17 years and headed it for more than 10 years. Mahesh believes that the demographic dividend in India can turn into a nightmare if youth are not shown the right direction to maximize their capabilities. Careers 360 is the result of his deep understanding of student issues and the information gaps that need to be filled to help students to take an informed career decision. Our next panelist for today is Mr. Dinesh Tiwari, Chairman, Broadpeak Capital Advisors. Dinesh is a private equity professional with over 25 years of experience in investing in emerging markets, predominantly India-related businesses, with significant years of partnership and leadership roles. He has been the founding member of several early-stage PE franchisees in India and the Middle East. He has worked with leading private equity firms like ICICI Ventures, CDC Active, Standard Chartered, JP Morgan, and multiple. He has a strong understanding of Indian corporate and taxation regulations in the context of equity transactions. The session for today will be moderated by Joel Panikot, Head of India CMT Association. Joel has spent over 19 years across education technology industry, including commercial education, corporate training, K-12, and continuing professional education. Joel is also the founder of a pre-seed edtech startup called PQ and the ex-CEO of another edtech Series A startup. Currently, he is the head of CMT Association in India, which is the top global credentialing body for technical analysis. I would like to thank our panelists for their time and giving us and the audience today this opportunity to learn from their experience and insight. A quick reminder to mute your microphones and send in your questions via chat. Without taking much time, over to you, Joel.
Thank you so much, Shivangi. And thank you once again, Mahesh, Dinesh, for taking out your time and having this conversation. It's something that's very close to our hearts, all of us. And I think we should start with addressing the virus in the room. So maybe I'll invite each of you, starting with Mahesh and then Dinesh, to speak about what you understand in the context of the education and education technology industry, the impact of the virus and the pandemic around the world. How is that impacting education as you know it and businesses, and maybe what entrepreneurs can take away from this? We spend a couple of minutes talking about our individual perspectives and then move into a conversation around that. Mahesh.
So I think I was speaking to an economist last week, and he was telling me that it's as if edtech has been fast forwarded by about at least 1 decade, if not two. What we were supposed to adapt maybe in 2030, we have adapted now. And maybe even 2040 we are being forced to adapt now. And India as a country, normally when something is thrust on us, we adapt to it very fast, and that's what seems to have happened, because across the system you suddenly see schools, colleges, faculty, students, teachers, everyone's adapting to online technology, which we never thought was possible if it was to be done through a regulation or any intervention or anything like that. So it's been forced on them, and they've taken it. But we must be very careful about suddenly embracing it where it might start impacting social equity. Because I also know the other day I was speaking to Atishi Marlena, who works with the Delhi government and on education, and she was telling me that more than 50% of the students have either a device or the bandwidth or the resource. So to that extent, while we can keep talking of online edtech having taken over and online teaching taking over, 50% of the students are still working on IVR and SMS. Right. So just imagine what we're dealing with out here. The Chinmaya mission, where they have about 90 schools, and they have schools which are at a high end, at a middle end, and also at a very low end, where it is meant to serve students free of, the education is free and so on and so forth. At the low end schools, the schools are not equipped with either a device or a mobile or even a bandwidth. So there is no teaching happening. They're engaging them through whatever they can, but definitely not through an online learning that the high end schools have adapted to very quickly. So one should be very clear that online is going to be here, and we're going to use more of it. The gin is not about to be put back in the bottle, but to embrace it as if that's the change that we are all looking for, and that will solve all our problems is wrong, because maybe half the population would be kept away from the whole thing. The other thing I see is that this COVID situation has definitely impacted the purchasing power of people. So you'll also actually see people questioning the kind of fee that we are about to pay, and they'll start discriminating or distinguishing between what is a good school which charges more versus what is a school that charges more but doesn't deliver the learning outcome. That's the second part of it. The third part of it, for sure, I do think that mobility of students would be in question. For me, study abroad is out of question for some time, because even if the student wants to go, the universities might not take. Even if the university wants to take, the countries might not allow you in. Like that last Thursday, a bunch of students went to US and Singapore on student visas, and everyone but for the students on student visas have been rejected. So the students who went on student visas have not been allowed to enter the country, whereas the other people have been allowed to enter the country. Which means that there is definitely a question mark on student visas. So students must start looking at or exploring the possibility of studying within India in a very good university or college for some time, or do twinning programs and those kind of things. So three things, as I said, online technology is here to stay, but we should be very careful of saying that is the change that India wants. Two, I do think mobility is an issue. And three, purchasing power. So people will start questioning the ROI from here on, because it's not as easy as it was earlier.
Thank you, Mahesh. Brilliant points you made. Let's take it over to Dinesh now, and then I'll summarize some ideas as well.
Thanks, Joel. I completely agree with what Mahesh has said. I mean, this has essentially been a trend that has actually just got accelerated there. And if you were to look at it, this was a trend that was in the works over the years. I mean, if you start to look at just purely the Indian space, right, you did have people like an NIT or an Aptech that came in, and then it started getting the people like an Educom and a few other players that came into the place, which is in. And now slowly you find that we have all been, as you rightly said, thrust into the situation where we don't have an option but to actually adopt and embrace digital education. Having said that, the reaction that we are seeing right now is more what you would call so-called emergency measures, right? When you look at it, when you look at education as a subject, right, ultimately you break down education. It is essentially one delivery of knowledge and assessment of whether people have really sort of, whether it works, the efficacy of the knowledge, and assessment which is in place. And then based on that, some analytics to say how you can actually improve again the delivery of knowledge. So it's a loop that you do. Right now, what we are seeing is only the delivery of knowledge, on delivery or imparting of knowledge that is taking place, right? Nobody is really bothered about the efficacy as such. I mean, is it working? Is it not working? Are all all students learning in the same manner? Or is it only the bright and the smart and the ones which have self-initiative taking that on there? So I think a lot of these kind of questions that typically a school or a college actually addresses are just not in the consideration right now. Because right now we are basically in the here and now, what's the emergency response that we really need to give. Having said that, what it does is it essentially allows everybody to experience digital education. So if you look at it, say for example, before, during, and after, and if you were to look at once we get after this pandemic and after this entire issue which is in, we'll definitely see that the people who have adopted that change will definitely be significantly higher than those that had done before. So there's definitely a behavioral change that will take place. Having said that, I think some of the challenges that we really face essentially are having been thrust into a situation where we really need to get into, I won't call online education, but I would say so much distance education, right? So we're just tweaking what we had to do in a physical classroom, but trying to use concepts like Zoom like this, which is in place, or a Microsoft Teams, or any other related bit to actually, one, conduct the course or the class in a similar fashion. Now, I would call that more a distance education, basically trying to teach essentially what you're doing in a classroom, trying to do it long distance. But to actually make it effective, to make sure that the efficacy is there, it works, it produces results, I think those are things that will take some time to happen there. And I think those are the things that one should really focus on. Mahesh brought up an interesting point, which is in terms of the fact that what's the world going to look like? How different is it going to be? Are borders going to get shut down? When you talked about the study abroad kind of a mechanism, right? Indian students in the US is a large number. It's almost about closer to 1 million students that go every year. And that's a large number of students that are there. Now, the question is that a trend that will intensify? Will people basically change in terms of visa regulations? Will there be more of a xenophobia that will be in place? I think those are the long-term trends that one really doesn't have an answer to at this point in time. And clearly, I think the price points and the cost of education, I think, needs to come down. Clearly, I think given the economic impact that the COVID virus has taken, I think people's purchasing power is relatively lower than what it was before. So to that extent, I think one would really need to think deeply about, one, the price points at which one really delivers education. Over to you, Joel.
Thanks, Dinesh. And I think both of you have covered some very valid points that entrepreneurs need to start thinking about in this new COVID time. You mentioned, Dinesh, that the entire journey of education, right, from whether it's the dissemination of information, the assessment, and the analytics behind it. What my experience of education so far, and with the very large amount of conversation around education technology, a lot of it gets centered around actually an extension of teleconferencing technology more than education itself. So yes, these are benefits, and these are benefits that should accrue to everyone. And I would argue that Coursera and edX are also kind of symptomatic of this change, where we have been seeing opportunities for synchronous and asynchronous education. So whether it's a live Zoom conversation like the one we are having right now, or splitting up a series of conversations like this and adding some questions and turning it into a course on the various learning platforms there are. So both of these are changes that have been happening, which Mahesh also mentioned, will be pushed further towards more popular acceptance. And in doing so, it kind of reminds me of when the demonetization happened as well. That was a strong push for all of us into a world of digital digital money that a lot of people want. Unfortunately, though, that came with a lot of pain as well, and that's something that I think, as education and technology professionals, we should think about: is how can we prepare the kind of solutions that we are building for a world where this pain is inevitable, and can we ease that? Maybe that's a space of opportunities. And so, with that, I want to kind of take our conversation towards three areas. One, because these three areas of disparity, I think, are where a lot of opportunity lies for entrepreneurs like myself. And to think of, one is the disparity of sector. Now, in the questions that we had discussed early on as well, a very interesting observation was made that a lot of what we are calling education technology, which is let's say, an extension of Zoom, synchronous or asynchronous, is happening um, in the B2C kind of space, where colleges are able to access and address their students, where tuition classes have and test prep classes have all found this nice online environment to settle into. It happens in a one-to-one on a one-to-one basis as well as on a one-to-many basis. But that's all in a very B2C kind of sense. I'd love for your thoughts on what can entrepreneurs think of in the B2B space, providing solutions for organizations, and in the B2G space, where maybe there's a wider conversation to happen with the government. Just I'll take a minute to talk about my context here. So before these current roles that I'm doing, I used to run an edtech social enterprise firm as well. And what we did was build hardware and software solutions to take learning to low-income schools where the internet was not easily accessible. Now, while the product itself was very robust and is still very strong platform, the challenge was trying to sell something to a low-income school, by definition, low income. And so one of the pivots that we had to execute as an organization was to see if we can work with both government and CSR funds to see if they would be willing to then provide these solutions to the low-income schools. And as we became the monitoring and evaluation organization, implementing these solutions and helping schools to use them. So this is one area, and I'd love thoughts from both of you. Mahesh, you said that you were speaking with government officials and with large trusts across the economic spectrum as well. How do you see opportunities emerging for entrepreneurs within the edtech space to make the best of, or to be able to cater across the three sectors, moving outside B2C and going to B2B and B2G as well?
Joel, I actually have a different way of dealing with this whole thing, thinking about these things. Like, we have fancied the word entrepreneur, edtech, and whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Was Dhirubhai Ambani an entrepreneur? He was. But was he called an entrepreneur those days? No. My mother was telling me that my grandmother, who comes from coastal Andhra Pradesh, which means they don't understand anything about Hindi, learned Hindi because there used to be one session on All India Radio, and they used to subscribe to a magazine which would, which you have to refer to when that class is coming. And she learned Hindi and she can write, read, and speak Hindi very well. Now, would you call that edtech? In the current times, yeah, exactly, right. So when Dinesh also was talking about how we adapt and how we scale it up, we were always scaled up till we came in the sense that it is always there. You go back to the earlier days, you would have lessons on Akashvani or read All India Radio. You would have actually a small magazine that you can refer to, and you read the subject, learn the subject, and you become an expert at the subject. So in a sense, one, for me, I don't think we can actually scale up and impact the entire country unless the government is a part of it.
Right.
And government would be a part of it if we actually go with a simple, adaptable, and a solution which doesn't intimidate them, but still embraces what they're thinking, right? And that is what we need to be focusing on. You said it right, that what we're dealing with now in the space of edtech is actually telecom technology. Have we really worked on AI to say that while the student is sitting not in the classroom, I exactly know what the student is thinking because AI tells me? That is what technology is all about. Whereas what we're throwing back at students is the telecom technology and the video conferencing technology and the videos, fantastic videos, which is something else, and so on and so forth, right? So for me, I think we have to come up with simple solutions that don't intimidate students, that make it so simple that students think it is like the back of their hand and they can learn it. Explain to the government and bureaucracy and everyone that it is a very, very simple solution, instead of complicating the matter by calling it technology and all the stuff that we talk about. If we can do that, then we cover the other 60-70%. Otherwise, we'll continue to cover the 30% and say we are a fantastic edtech.
Right. Dinesh, how do you see this evolving? And as Mahesh mentioned, there is a need, one, to not just intimidate people with the words education, technology, and AI and ML, but how do you see entrepreneurs being able to pick up on the opportunities that Mahesh was hinting towards?
Absolutely. I think before that, I just want to sort of lay out the landscape in India, right? I think the Indian landscape is a bit different there. I mean, you do have, and it's a relatively a heterogeneous market there. When you start to look at it, one, unlike a lot of other global markets, education in India is largely privately run there, except for, and when you start to look at the space, so it's education in India is a lot more private than essentially the government run, which is in place, right? And when you start to look at the investing world, where have people focused on investing, right? It has been more on supplemental education rather than the core education, right? Where have people been investing money? So even if you look at online education, or even just leave alone online, but where do people invest in? It was essentially in skill development, right? Like an NIT or an aptech. So it was not really core education which is in place there. You had all your test prep bits that were there, right? You had the quota education system, you had the Hyderabad colleges that were in place. And this was all basically to say that I'll not tamper with the core education, but I'll basically provide supplemental education. And the results of that would essentially be that you would get an admission into an IIT or a JEE or any other such college. So which is why when you look at the advertising or messaging communication that a lot of these people did was essentially result oriented, right? So X number of students got an admission of people who passed out from either a Resonance or a Career Launcher or these kind of academies that is in. So you had essentially one private investment that has gone in largely in the area of supplemental education, test prep, preparation, and not really in core education. And I think what Mahesh has been talking about essentially is the fact that what we really need to develop essentially is the core education, and which is where we need to partner with government to actually do that, which is in. And that I think is a crying need, because a bulk of the country essentially depends on that. And that's the larger base of the pyramid. That's an opportunity there. As of now, if you look at it, the private sector or the entrepreneurs have really focused on the top end of the pyramid, which is more a city-centric kind of a school which is in place. So, for example, even if you were to take the closest to mainstream education, which has been people like in Educom, which have gone in with a smart classes, right? It is essentially being city-bred kind of schools where you basically say that I'll basically enhance the method of teaching, provide greater diversity, and hence as a result of it, the schools can charge more. And that was essentially the value proposition that really came in. So I think what we are seeing is the fact that it is a fairly heterogeneous market. I think it's very difficult to paint it with one brush there. The K-12 school education, the college education, and essentially the skill development, online career improvement classes. I think all of these are very different markets. And I think I would sort of hesitate to paint all of them with one brush there. So I think very quickly when you get into this, you realize that it's actually not one market, but multiple micro markets that one is really addressing there. And to look at it from that perspective there. Also, just adding on a bit to the question that you had asked before, which is the B2B market or the B2G market. I think the characteristics of the B2B or the B2G market, which are relatively unique, which I think needs to be kept in mind there. So, for example, when you look at the B2B market, a lot of schools, either the owner is a government, which essentially these are central government run or state government run, or these are essentially trusts which are in place there. There are very few, I mean, technically you can't have a for-profit school except an IB schooling system which is in place. Everything else is relatively not for profit there, which essentially makes the economics or the business model a bit difficult to actually put together. And I think it is in the backdrop of all of this that we really need to think about the opportunities that are there.
That's great, Mesh. Actually, this brings me to a comment and a question that came in. The first one that came in was from Anshul Kothari, who's asking which sector of EdTech among primary education, supplements, test prep, upskilling, or higher ed will witness maximum impact. And I think this you've answered this very well, Dinesh, in that because we are such a heterogeneous education environment, I find that there is opportunity everywhere. Professor Yashwant Kanetkar, who taught me C more than 2 decades ago, was asked this very interesting question once. This was in the early days of C programming, and was just, when people were just getting to understand the potential that programming presented. This is, I'm talking about late 90s. And one of the students asked, where does the money lie? His simple answer was, the money lies where you can tap it. There is an opportunity I find in each of these sectors where efficiency can be brought in and where reach can be expanded. So for entrepreneurs who are looking at sectors, I would rather suggest that you find a sector that you respond to emotionally, and then find opportunities within that. So yeah, thanks, Dinesh. That makes a lot of sense. But speaking of technology, there's another question as well that kind of leads into what I was talking about. Was something, Dinesh, you mentioned was going beyond just the delivery, but also the assessment and analytics. And with that comes in what Mahesh, you mentioned about artificial intelligence and the opportunities that it presents. Could you maybe throw light on what you see as the biggest opportunities that technology can uncover in terms of both conventional and non-conventional education? Mahesh, over to you.
Okay. So I think along with technology, if we can actually see, when a faculty member is teaching a student, he exactly knows that this guy is smart, and this girl is not too smart in this. So the questions are personalized so that you don't make someone feel inferior or superior. You exactly understand the strengths and weaknesses of every single child. If you have 60 children in the classroom, the teacher over a period of time exactly knows what the child is good at and what she's bad at, and deals with it that way, which is what technology must at some point in time deal with. If you push a similar question to all the audiences, then 20% or 30% of the students will just get so intimidated that they will never come back to the classroom, because they know that they're going to answer it wrong, and that will be displayed on the chart for everyone to see, right? So the thing is, what you're seeing as online learning technology at this point in time, we discussed that it is to a certain extent, video technology, to a certain extent, transmission technology. But the AI and ML should ensure that the faculty on the other side also personalizes his questions and his teaching methodology to each student while dealing with the entire classroom. And that's a possibility, because increasingly, when you actually have a personalized coach and a personalized tutor, we're going towards that. The more the data that we have, I know that one person is very good at comprehension, but the other person is very good at mathematics, right? So, and the third person is good at logics. So when you are dealing with a logic subject deal with logic, you can actually spread your questions such that, one gets a very difficult question, one a moderate question, one an easy question, and vice versa when it deals with English or comprehension. So in my opinion, the more you deal with online technologies, you need to start using AI and ML to personalize your, not the teaching part of it, but assessment part of it, right? At the end of it, all of us get a score with English comprehension, logic, mathematics, and all added together. So you might be very good at English, maths, but you might still fail in English, and you still fail, right? The sum total of this entire package is what a student will be all about. And not all students would be similar, right? So in my opinion, the more you deal with online technologies, you must start getting into how you can personalize your assessments and evaluation process, while the teaching can be similar at a certain level, so that we deal with every student fairly and not something else. The other thing I'll just add to what Dinesh said, earlier he talked of heterogeneous thing, and it's very interesting how we've dealt with this. If you want to deal with scale, it has to be at a school level, at a K-12 level. We all know that. And more importantly, it has to be with the government, because at the K-12 level, 70% of the schooling system is owned by the government, run by the government, and managed by the government. Whereas if you go to the higher education, though there are only about 1,100 universities is what India has, of which 500 are private. But of the other 600 also, most of them have affiliated colleges, which are private in nature. So you take Usmania University or Anna University or Karnataka University, the colleges are private colleges, private managed colleges, affiliated. So the state universities or the central universities are essentially examination conducting bodies with the colleges fronting end in terms of learning. So at a higher ed level, my estimate is between 85 to 90% students are going through the private hands. Whereas at a school level, 70% of the students are going through the government hands. And that's a good play to have with. So if you want to deal with scale, you need to deal with K-12 with the government. So we need to start looking at what are the technologies that will enable the government to deliver a service outcome, which will have a larger impact on the audiences and will also be more business for us. Then deal with the other part of it, which is higher education, where there's a huge clutter out there of many people trying to deal with the same student in terms of test prep and tutoring and those kind of things. I think we must go the other end, and that's a huge opportunity as I see.
That's wonderful.
Just to add, just to add to what Mahesh said, and just to elaborate that point, right? I think if you were to look at it today, frankly, with smartphones and cheap internet, what has happened is actually it has just made access easily available, right? So there is access to education, access to content that is there. So it's essentially the people who can do well and make advantage of this are essentially people who are pull driven, right? So essentially it is the smarter of the lot, the more curious, who are basically pulling because they've got access, which is there. So look at it, most education technology today is essentially one a pull driven product, which is there, right? Today you give, for example, and this is something that one initially a friend of mine who had told me when he was in the insurance business, right? Saying that insurance is never bought. Insurance is always sold, right? You never voluntarily go and buy insurance. You're always sold insurance, which is why the premiums that are there on sale are so high as an insurance agent, which is it, right? So when you start to look at that, education in some way also needs to be, you need to be taught there, and that's the fundamental bit which is there, because given a choice, people will spend more money on entertainment and media and gaming and things like that than education on a voluntary basis. If it is a pure voluntary exercise, that's the way that you will find the consumption habits take on. So you really need to find out ways and means on how to actually make it essentially a pull product, where people can, a push product where you can say that people are basically adopting this technology and basically making sure that they can actually, the adoption is much higher. And that's the challenge that I think a lot of them are facing.
Yeah, this actually ties in very well, Dinesh, to this question as an invitation for a comment by Lakshmi that says that engagement of students in academics is seen as the biggest challenge relating to EdTech. The variety of resources to consuming for adults to choose from, let alone children. It's also the way that students are motivated to learn. So my thought around this is, like you mentioned, making the content interesting, using analytics that that data and students' interactions with systems now gives us in a very large amount, and finding a way to gamify that experience, I think, is of tremendous importance. And this I find as an opportunity that anyone who's trying to develop solutions in the space of education should really think of very seriously, is how do you motivate the learners on your platform to actually stay engaged with it? I mean, I know gamification is a very broadly used term, as thrown about left, right, and center, and it's a lot more than just adding points and badges and leaderboards, etc. But if we can think of harnessing people's intrinsic motivation to learn and giving them extrinsic nudges, as it were, that helps them out, that I think is something that technology is in a better position to do than it has ever been. To Mahesh's point, there is so much data that now machine learning algorithms can actually come up with a more personalized learning experience for every learner, and that is something that can kind of become meaningful solutions deployed at scale as well. Dinesh, just because you obviously work with a number of startups that are looking at education technology related tools, are you seeing something that is a flavor of the season, as it were, that people are more excited about in terms of deployment of EdTech, or is it widely speaking?
No, I think, as you rightly said, the opportunity is across the various spectrum. But if you were to sort of single out and highlight a few areas that are a lot more popular than others, I think it's more in the area of essentially something which is result oriented, which can actually either get you a quick certification, which is in a certification that entitles you to get a job, kind of a market, or essentially something that essentially helps you prepare to essentially get an admission in a coveted college, which is in place, right? So the test prep or a certification to actually get a job, essentially, these are places where you find that you're closer to the end result. And as a result of that, the adoption is a lot more higher, and hence people are willing to pay for it. So I think that's where you find a lot more of businesses actually gravitating towards, which is there. But as you said, I think the opportunities across the board there. I think within that, so you find a number of businesses. So for example, if you were to look at the single largest edtech business in the country is basically Byju's, right? Which is basically raised, I would say, if you can look at the Indian edtech sector fundraising with Byju's and without Byju's, right? It is as significant as that when it comes to the quantum of capital that is raised. So essentially, those are businesses which are saying, which are supplement. I'll not basically do your core education, but I'll help you do better. And when you intrinsically look at this, these are essentially people, these are targeted towards people who are self-motivated on their own and are basically willing to pay for essentially improving their chances. And that's the customer set that people are looking at. So the customer is already motivated. He has the ability to pay, and clearly there is an outcome that you can promise. So it's the confluence of these three that people seem to be most attracted towards.
Which I would imagine makes sense from an investment perspective as well, because you want to be able to show a reasonable path to profitability shorter than most. Because that also feeds into the fears right now within kind of this COVID-based environment of what do startups that are already in motion do about their runways. And this is something I'd once again love to invite comment from both of you. Mahesh, you already run a business, and if you could comment on how this whole COVID environment has impacted the business, and do you see, I mean, obviously yours is a far more mature business than most of the audience right now, but do you see that you have to change the way you approach business in some way? And then I'll come to Dinesh and ask about what other firms can do. Mahesh, okay. Mahesh, you're on mute right now. Can you just unmute, sir?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's changed for everyone, not just for us. See, it's just about who bled how much. Everyone would bleed in this entire thing. The Black Swan event that we talk of is there, but isn't there. I'll tell you how it works out, right? You take offline, because we're talking of outcome-based thing, I'm confining myself to that. You take the off coaching center. The first point of contact for a student to actually subscribe to an offline coaching is the coaching center itself, if it is open. It is not open today, right? That's the first part. Now you deal with the online things which the others were offering. It can be a Topper, Vedantu, Byju's, or anyone that. They used to have feet on street which would go to your home, explain the product, and then sell the product. It isn't happening now because you can't enter someone's home. So while we actually see a huge jump in the number of people who actually, visit your website and all, the sales, the revenue side of it is still a question mark. And you'll see that as the numbers come out, because the simple thing is that when you want to sell a 50,000 rupee, 100,000 rupee product, you need to have that physical connect and also explain that technology product has to be explained. That is suffering at this point in time, as I see. So the low price product, which is a simple, mock test thing, and those kind of things will sell. A booster, anything sub 10,000 will sell better. And that you see many of these people also now selling, open classroom, free classrooms, less than 5,000 rupee product would have a huge amount of traction. But you take it to the normal ticket pricing that you have, it's not about to happen. The other thing that has happened is the admission cycles have got postponed. Now it's September instead of April, right? And to that extent, you actually will have each of these companies struggling in cash flows if you're not raised enough capital, right? Because money is going to come in for universities, colleges, and all sometime in the month of August, September, and to that extent, the entire train is delayed. Having said that, study abroad, anyone who's in study abroad and was into the business of actually creating a huge marketplace from India to send them abroad, they've completely fallen apart. What to do? It's come down to 30% of what it would be, right? You can deal with the online space and all those kind of things, but that's still a challenge. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is, earlier Dinesh mentioned about certification courses. Those have zoomed. because you're sitting at home, you don't know what to do. So you take the 1 month course, 2 month course and start, learning that, because in the interim, you can at least, equip yourself with one more skill set, which you did not have earlier, and also possibly a certification also. So you also have those skill-based programs zooming. It was anyway happening, Joel. Earlier also, if you see, the country was slowly moving away from, it's it's crawling, not even slow, was no longer dependent on formal qualifications to employ people, right? A student who comes with the data sciences analytics program from a very good private institute, which has no formal recognition, mind you, is still more accepted than a BTech computer science student.
That's true, yeah.
Right. So you are anyway moving into that. This will actually be push that much faster. The pace of that would move very, very fast. And two, the lockdown has impacted everyone. It's, as I keep saying, someone is bleeding to death, someone is bleeding, someone has got bruises. But everyone has got that on the revenue side of it. And which is where many people choose to talk of the audience side of it, of how many people are accessing them, instead of talking about how many people are buying them. And that you will actually, hopefully what we're all hoping is that the audiences that have experienced us, engaged with us, hopefully will convert to a customer at some point in time. And that's what we're living on hope and a prayer.
That makes a lot of sense, Mahesh. And as you mentioned, micro-credentialing is seeing a lot of growth now. I mean, so from my own experience with the CMT Association, technical analysis is a branch of study where people analyze the markets in order to participate and trade in it. And now in this time of both market downturn, high volatility plus the lockdown, we're seeing a surge of interest in this kind of credentialing, because obviously people are at home and want to do something. And though it's a pretty premium, high-end kind of program, people are still paying a amount of money for it, because it translates directly into some form of revenue generation and ROI. But you made a good point, that people are bleeding, and some are bleeding slowly, some are bleeding faster. So Dinesh, I want to ask you this: what can companies do, or is there a playbook that you might be able to share for entrepreneurs who are now building and trying to sustain their businesses that will help them to stretch their runway longer?
I think you absolutely said it right. I mean, the word is, how do you stretch the runway, right? And I think the first part of stretching the runway is that you need to survive. It's only if you survive to fight another day, right? I mean, the question is, more businesses actually die out of just running short of cash than profitability.
Yeah.
But I think very clearly, one, looking at elements of cost. And I'm sure across various webinars, a whole host of this has been talked about. How do you look at costs which have been there and look at that? But I think more importantly, what happens is that all of us tend to get distracted by doing too many things. Okay, let's do this, let's do that, and let's try out multiple different experiments. I think, and what we find that there is a declining productivity in each new experiment that you really try, because you then spread yourself too thin. I think in these times, it is better to relatively stick to the core and basically move away from a lot of the peripheral activity that one was really trying to do, which are, I would say, distractions, and basically stick to the core and trying to focus on that which is there. This is also, I think, the time to really look fairly critically hard as to one, and to look critically to see whether is this a business that really works, right? I mean, is the real customer demand really there? You're offering it to him free of cost, and which is why he is basically downloading it. But the question is, if you were to basically charge for it, will that market really exist? Is this a like to have, or is this a must have, right? I mean, if you're in a like to have kind of a business, then I think it's a very dangerous place to be in. Better to get out of that. Better to be in something which is a must have kind of a product. And I think all of us have this in terms of our own ABC analysis, or an 80-20 kind of a rule which is there. And when we look at our own day-to-day life, we really find that we are spreading ourselves too thin, or basically doing things that are really not as productive, which is in place there. I think this is the time to really take a critical introspection about the activities that we are really doing, and prioritizing what needs to be done, and to be a bit ruthless about basically killing something, right? If something is not working, then it's better to actually shut it down relatively early on, and use the same resources to your core offering, which is there. So I would think that is there. I think focusing primarily on one profitability which is in place, to see that even if you're not profitable, but at least you have a clarity of that path to profitability which is in place there. I mean, are there some elements that are showing you that you can get profitable, or you're not, if you're not profitable at this point in time? And is this a big enough market? If it is not a big enough market, and if it is a niche market that you're really addressing, and there's nothing wrong with that. If it's a niche market that you're addressing, then don't get in investors with a very different set of expectations.
Yeah.
Because that's the time when you basically have a problem, right? I mean, if you're addressing a small market and a profitable market, which is good, which is there, but then get investors that basically agree to the same school of thought, which is there. If not, look for a market which is fairly big. But I think the focus needs to be on cash, ability to basically, one, look at a runway of 5-6 months runway at least, of basically being able to meet expenses.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. I think what you've touched on are probably the hardest realities any entrepreneur has to face. One is honesty. Are we in the business we claim we are? And two, being ruthless with oneself, which I think, every entrepreneur thinks of their project as their baby. And throttling that baby might be difficult, but then I guess the trader in me says, it's better to cut your losses and live to trade another day. You live to fight another day, and you can come back into the business later as well. So, we could continue this conversation. There's so much to be discussed, and every little, nuance of the world of education technology is, at least to me, super, super fascinating. But at this point, we'll bring this on this grim note that Dinesh laid. We'll bring this conversation to a close. And Shivangi, if you could just lob a few questions to us that you'd like us to answer.
Sure. So I think one of the most critical questions right now, actually not critical but relevant, is that so far the Indian education system has focused more on a learning by rote, question answer kind of format. But this current situation is actually moving the whole education space in a whole new direction, because things that we were doing in terms of writing exams, evaluations, mugging a textbook may not be relevant. So do you think that this would actually be the opportunity for newer learning tools, some of the things that Mahesh also suggested in terms of more app-based, interactive kind of technologies, which is not just your teacher Zoom calling you and giving you the lesson online? Do you think it's time for such an innovation?
I'll start with this, and then maybe then I'll ask both the speakers to comment on it. But I think that it's almost inevitable. And as you mentioned, we have been in a culture where learning by rote has been encouraged over time, but that's changing as well. And if you think about it, there was no playbook for the COVID crisis. But the skills required to deal with unprecedented crises like these need to become part of academia and part of the way teaching is done. And with that in mind, Mahesh mentioned obviously the importance of using technology and analytics to get more and more intimate with the students' learning curve. Maybe suggest a shift from summative assessments to formative assessments, and this suggests maybe an adaptive model of learning, a personalized learning platform that helps to create a learning path for every student. There's tremendous opportunity, and I think if for every entrepreneur who's working on these areas, finding a small space where they can test these ideas and then provide a POC to potential investors or even larger clients, this is a tremendous opportunity for entrepreneurs here. Mahesh, what do you think about that?
So I won't answer that question directly. I'll try to do it in a roundabout way. I'll talk about what we can learn from what COVID has taught us. What is the first priority as far as I, as an educationist, would be. I think this is one thing where we should use this to ensure that their education is affordable. So the moment the technology moves in, we all say that technology should bring down the cost, right? This is a huge opportunity for all of us to bring in the cost of education to such a level that it becomes affordable for everyone. The last NSSO data talks of 40 million students falling apart because education was unaffordable for them. We as a country cannot deal with that. We're dealing with we talk of demographic dividend. You don't have a dividend unless you invest. We are the only country which believes that dividend comes because we have high population. We don't invest in that, right? The other part of it is, while dealing with affordability, you look at US, students are asking, they're filing cases to demand the fee refund because that's not what they paid for, right? And look at India. While we talk of demographic dividend, the fee of IIM 12 years back was 2 lakh rupees. Today it's 25 lakh rupees. The fee of IIT was 25,000 rupees 12 years back. It's now 2.75 lakh rupees, which means we increased the fees 12x times in 12 years. It's a criminal thing. So I think the first challenge that we must take up as a country is to say, can we ensure that now that people are adapting to technology, can we bring down the cost of education to such a level using technology, which makes it affordable, so that if the student cannot pay, still the state can afford it, because the cost comes down to that extent. The other day, someone was talking about how a proctored examination is $15. I said, proctored examination is $15 when you have 500 students. If it is 50 million students, what happens? It becomes 5 cents possibly, right? So for me, I'll use this as an opportunity to say, how can we use technology to make education so affordable? Because you don't need the same infrastructure. You don't need so many faculty. You can actually have one faculty teaching and everyone going to the labs. So can the labs be a private setup of labs? The way we actually have computer stations everywhere where people take examinations, JEE or NEET. Can we actually have 1 million labs around the country and someone teaching online, and then you do the offline lab practice in a private lab and come back and take an exit examination to say that I'm better than a student who joined IIT or IIM for that matter. So for me, this is a fantastic ground to be standing on and say, how do we revolutionize and do everything that we failed to do or could not do earlier? And can this be an opportunity? And that's what I will look at it if I was sitting at the top of this entire thing.
Dinesh, what do you feel? How can a business, kind of be ready for such opportunities?
No, I think the question to ask is basically one, what is the objective? I mean, what is it that we are trying to achieve, right? Which is there. And essentially, it comes back to this whole question of assessment and what's the objective, and are we being able to achieve the objective better, right? So if rote learning was basically produce a result X, right? By basically using technology, are we making it X plus 50% or 100%? I mean, is that really happening? I think that is what we need to see. And the point that Mahesh brought out, which is in, right? If I was basically can I leverage my technology in such a manner that if I was teaching 50 students, can I now reach 200 students, right? Can I basically enhance that base that were there and rightfully then reap the demographic dividend that we're really talking about? I think any investment that we make in essentially enhancing the method of education needs to be linked to an outcome that is going to come out, right? Whether you use an AI, an ML, or a VR, or an AR, or whatever it is, right? It should improve. I mean, if the learning quotient was X, is that increased? Or am I able to reach out to a much larger number of people and thereby bring down the price point without reducing the efficacy, right? Then it really works. I think we need to have a measurement metric in place, right? Like, for example, in HR, one of the things they say that what cannot be measured cannot be improved, right? And I think we use the word learning in a very loose context, which is in. And the only assessment of learning that we have is whether you clear an exam or you essentially score well in an exam. And that's the only measurement of learning that we really have. So we really need to understand whether the measurement metrics can be quantified. Can we quantify the improvement in learning that is taking place in some manner? The quantitative metrics are easy. The number of people that you reach, the price point that you really reach. But the question is that whether the concept has really been understood well. Is there another metric other than basically just the number of students that clear a certain exam that's in place? I think those are the things that we really need to look at there.
This interestingly brings me to the next question. If you look at the way our population and our requirements out of education are, a large percentage of the population, we would say maybe even as high as 70 to 80% is essentially going to school or colleges to earn a better livelihood. And learning is not really the purpose for which people are enrolled. So what role can EdTech play in this kind of scenario? Is it possible to really expand the scope of their learning while looking at the whole livelihood aspect of it?
I mean, coming from where I am right now, I think that's exactly where, as an industry, we are headed. A lot of the micro credentialing universe is very professional or very vocation oriented. You're finding short courses that will help you to either code or trade or pick up another skill which can immediately be monetized. As Dinesh was saying some time ago, that the audience is also looking more immediately for skills that can be turned into income versus skills that will make them better human beings, as it. Although that obviously is very important. So I think there definitely is tremendous interest in this, and the market has already begun to move across this. The National Skill Qualification Framework was a very interesting initiative. It's still on, but I don't know if it has taken the full form that I hoped it would, where you have a fungible set of measures across skills, which, when all put together, can map the learning journey of from a young child all the way up to a working professional, irrespective of what kind of work they choose. That's my 2 cents on this.
Sure. So interestingly, if we look at another question along this line, now we have this whole range of startups in the edtech space who have innovative solutions to maybe current problems and things that we have not even foreseen still. Is there any tips are there any tips that the panel can offer on them in terms of what should their pitch be? How do they take it out to the market, especially in these times where things have to be done differently? As Mahesh pointed out earlier in response to one of the questions, that price point would be a major concern because you can't really sell something which comes at a higher ticket size because the touch and feel factor is missing. So are there any other aspects that we could look at?
I think this, Dinesh, is for you. No one can answer that.
No, so I think you rightly. This is the question is one. I think you just need to go back to the fundamentals, which is in right. I mean, is the product and the service that you're really trying to offer, is that a real need for it there? And is that need really there? Uh, and the question is whether is it something that the person really needs, or is it a like to have? Is it basically one of the an accessory, or is it a core product that the person needs? I think if you can really understand this clearly and bring that in, I think then it makes sense there. Um, and I think everything else is a derivative of that, which is the price point, the market size, the scalability. All of that is basically a second order question that you really need to have on that. There. I think there's nothing more that I think there is. It's like a fundamentally any other business which is in place there. But there's just one thing that I want to add to the previous question that was really asked there. And I think one of the things that we have not really talked about essentially is that teaching and education in India has been an intermediated topic. We have a large number of teachers that are in place, and teaching has always been through a conduit, and that conduit has been a teacher. What edtech businesses tend to ignore is the value of a teacher, which is in place. And you cannot really offer a product without involving the teacher in some shape and form there. And I think that's the way that I would suggest businesses to really look at, rather than changing the ecosystem completely. Look at ways of working with the ecosystem. So rather than fighting the system, can you basically make, rather than viewing them as adversaries, but view them basically as partners in this progress that is in place? I think would be a better way. So for example, I think existing teacher network that is in place, teacher training, and involving teachers in the program that you're doing, I think is a much viable way of addressing students. Not theoretically possible to address millions of students without them in place.
Wonderful. Great. I think we've almost hit our time. So maybe if I'd request each of the speakers to the panelists to just maybe take a minute and give your closing thoughts on this discussion, and what do you think the way forward can be, something actionable for our listeners? We'll start with you, Mahesh.
I think just need to decide what kind within education you actually have two kinds of audiences, right? what is the kind of audience you want to deal with is something that you must be very clear about. If you're dealing with B2C audiences, then create a B2C product where monetization is very, very important. And if you want to deal with impact and those kind of things, then you're dealing with B2G and not anything else. It's not even B2B. Actually, it's largely B2G because that's where the most amount of audience is. There's a huge opportunity there. There is a huge scale there. That's a huge impact possible. But you should be very clear that you're dealing with a certain set of people through which you will deal with millions of people. At any point in time, please, for God's sake, don't assume that everything would be normal from here on. Even for education, people will talk of the Paytm movement, the Black Swan movement, and those kind of things. Understand that we are not living in the times that we used to live earlier. People will be very value conscious, which always is the case, but now it will be more so. So unless you are able to monetize something, and Dinesh said rightly that, do you need it or is it something that you may want to have it? If they don't need it, they will not take it. So don't create products which are meant to satisfy or satiate your own thinking of what they need. You must be very clear that there is a genuine need out there and then create that.
Dinesh, would you like to add your comments?
I think this is if one is actually in the edtech space, I mean, there is no better time to be around, actually, frankly. I mean, this is the tailwinds are so strong. Yeah. The disruption in the system is so high, right? I mean, you couldn't have got a better time. Essentially, cost of access has become much cheaper. There's basically awareness which is in place. So I would say there's no better time to be an edtech entrepreneur than today. I mean, you couldn't have sort of thought about this space at any other time there. I think very clearly within this context, look at building out a real business, which is basically based on cash flows rather than based on valuations in the current context. You did have a scenario where essentially a lot of investments were valuation driven over the last 4-5 years. My sense is that is going to change to a bit more cash flow driven needs and requirement. So the way investors are going to look at these businesses are going to be a bit different over there. So as Joel mentioned, having a long runway and building out a real business is actually the need of the hour.
I'll just add to that. I'm sorry. I completely am with Dinesh on this. I think there has never been a better moment for edtech players to be in the business. Never been a better moment. People are adapting or forced to adapt. So to that extent, there is no better time for any one of us to be in this space than now.
Yeah, I agree. Dinesh, Mahesh, thank you to both of you as well. I think the benefit of being the last person is that all the heavy lifting in terms of ideas has already been done by panelists. And I think the only thing I'd add from the experience I have is I'd urge all the entrepreneurs on the call to introspect really hard about this is one of the best times to be in the market and to be bringing out a business like both of them said, because there is so much in flux right now. But that also increases the risk of thinking that just because there is an idea, it will be accepted. This is a time that I think will reward frugality and efficiency more than any other time before. Like Dinesh mentioned, we've moved from. I think we should have already moved from a cash flow from a valuation-driven world to a cash flow-driven world. So if it's a real business, my belief is have it make some money. And the moment, even if someone is willing to part with even 10 rupees for you, you're offering something of value to them, and that value will drive valuations. So on that broadly philosophical note, as I said, this conversation can go on forever. But over to Shivangi.
Thank you, Joel, Dinesh, and Mahesh for this extremely engaging discussion, and also for the audience for their active involvement, our members for their constant support, and the team at the back. I cannot forget about them for curating this session. A big thank you to our sponsors and partners, event partner Ideal Insurance Brokers, taxation partner Tax Mantra Global. Our next sector and focus on MA Reboot 2 Industry Edition is digital media, which is on the 15th of May at 11:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time. I request all of you to definitely log in for this session. Thank you once again. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, Joel. Bye, Dinesh.
Thanks, Shivangi. Thanks, Joel.
Bye.
Thank
Mahesh,
you.
great,
Bye. Thanks,
great
Mahesh.
being
Bye.
up on the panel. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Ira. Bye bye.